This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 6, April 17th, 2018. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. And for this episode, we're doing a first ever group interview, which should be interesting. My guests are Daren, Welsh, and James Montalvo of the Extravehicular Activity, or EVA group at NASA. Daren and James are both flight controllers and instructors. They first installed MediaWiki on their local network in 2011, and since then, MediaWiki has become an integral part of the knowledge management system in the whole flight operations directorate at Johnson Space Center where they work. I first met them at a Semantic MediaWiki conference, or SMWCon, 4 years ago, and since then, I've met them at a number of Enterprise MediaWiki conferences, or EMWCons, most recently the one we just had a few weeks ago in their hometown, Space City itself, Houston, Texas. The plan was originally to do this interview in person, but they just didn't have much free time during the conference, and they haven't had much time since then either, which is probably a good sign. Thankfully, they've managed to find a little time to talk on this podcast. So, Daren and James, welcome to the program.
Hi there.
Now, before I start with the questions, there are people who claim that the Wikimedia Foundation never does any marketing of MediaWiki. But to them, I would point to a 2016 blog post on the Wikimedia blog, which was about the use of MediaWiki at NASA, and included a nice photo of the two of you. There was also a short online video that the Wikimedia Foundation produced, also in 2016, about the use of MediaWiki at NASA. And then there was a post they had on Twitter in 2018 about the use of MediaWiki at NASA. So maybe it's more fair to say that the Wikimedia Foundation doesn't think anyone will be interested in the outside use of MediaWiki unless it's related to outer space in some way. Which may be accurate on their part. Outer space is a subject that fascinates a lot of people and has fascinated humanity since the dawn of time, really. So this was really just a long-winded way of getting to my first question, which is how you ended up in your current positions at NASA. A lot of kids dream about being an astronaut. I know I did. So I wonder if it was pretty much a straight-line process to get to where you are today from when you were kids, or if it was more roundabout than that. Daren, let's start with you.
Okay. So yeah, like you, as a kid, I dreamed of becoming an astronaut. I remember watching shuttle missions on TV and seeing the astronauts do their floaty tricks in space and even spacewalks, and thinking how cool that was. I didn't really know what was required to get there. As a kid, you don't really know what the direction is. So my parents guided me into engineering, and so I got a degree in aerospace engineering from University of Washington. But I found out too late that NASA only hires people directly through the co-op process. And so by my senior year, I was too late to really take advantage of the co-op system. But thankfully, I found out that there's lots of contractors that work at NASA. In fact, most of the workforce here in flight operations is actually contractors. But my first job wasn't in flight operations with EVA. It was actually an upgrade to the avionics displays on the space shuttle. So it was actually sort of software related. But that program, after a couple of years, they canceled it. And as part of that, I got to interview several places within FOD, and EVA just seemed like the way to go. It was the most involved with the crew, and we just had a lot of variety in the job. And so that's how I ended up in this job.
Yeah. Could you explain the co-op process briefly? Yeah.
So there's only a couple ways to get hired into NASA. I'm not sure when this happened, but ever since I've been out of college, the only way to get hired is either what they call a badge swap, which is where it's a very rare thing, but if they find an opening for a civil servant position, then contractors can apply for that, and one person will get to basically swap over from contractor to civil servant, but still filling the same job title. But the more common way to get hired into NASA is through a co-op program. So college students from all across the country can apply for this. I think currently it's called the interns or pathway interns. And so for a semester at a time, they can work in part of NASA. So we have interns working in the EVA group all the time. And then usually a co-op or an intern will take several rotations. They'll go to different types of jobs, either all at the same center, like at Johnson Space Center, or maybe even at different centers across the country. And this gives them a variety of exposure to the different types of jobs at NASA. And then they, at the end of their college career, they can try to apply for the job that they like the most based on their experience.
Yeah. And James, how about you?
So for me, I went to college in Boston, and when I got out of school, I worked for a company called Avidyne that built kind of cockpit avionics for small airplanes, and I did that for a while, and was very interested in space and was reading about space topics all the time, and just decided it was time for a switch and wanted to move over into the space business. So started applying to places kind of all over the country, a lot in Florida and Houston, and did some interviews and interviewed for this job working with spacewalks, and it was by far the coolest one. So fortunately ended up here.
Cool. In terms of current NASA projects that people may have heard of, which ones are you involved with?
So we work entirely on the space station program. We have very little working outside of that program. So fortunately for us, one of the things that does kind of make the news occasionally is the news will say, well, astronauts were out doing a spacewalk today to install this or fix that or whatever. Unfortunately, a lot of times that those make it onto the news is when there's something that's not gone right. There's not as much coverage of things that do go right.
In brief, could you explain some of your typical non-IT job requirements?
Sure. So during EMW Con a couple weeks ago, I was doing lead up to an EVA that happened on March 29th. So that's kind of one of the most time-consuming aspects of our job. It'll really, for a period of time leading up to the EVA, it's very all-consuming.
Right.
And so that is, for maybe a year before EVA, you're planning procedures, and then you work in the neutral buoyancy lab, which is the big swimming pool in Texas, in Houston, and practice those procedures, tweak them, change them. But then in those last few weeks leading up to the EVA, there's just lots of changes that come out. There may be some piece of analysis that had only just been finished, so there's lots of last-minute changes to address those changes.
Yeah, so that James is talking mostly about the kind of the EVA planning and execution, which is specific to certain hardware or certain objectives, and that's a big part of our job. Another big part of our job is the generic training of astronauts. So we just had another class selected, and so actually starting here in a couple days, I'll be teaching two of the classes where they first get into the suits and practice or learn how to do stuff in the water in the neutral buoyancy lab. And so it actually takes astronauts roughly 2 years to go through that generic training before they're eligible to be assigned for a flight. And even then, once they're assigned to a flight, it's another 2 years of generic training just to try to address all the things that might possibly happen during their 6 months on board.
Right. Wow. I can't really have an interview about NASA in 2018 without talking about SpaceX, which had an amazing last 12 months, culminating in a launch in February in which they put a car into orbit around the sun for some reason. It makes it seem like the future of spaceflight is going to be more commercial and maybe weirder than people had previously imagined. How does the presence of SpaceX and other companies like Blue Origin affect what you guys do?
So at present, again, we're working the International Space Station program, making sure the space station is constructed and stays functioning the way it needs to be. So short term, that the existence of SpaceX and their successes doesn't really impact us that much. They do commercial resupply of the space station, and so they carry some of our hardware, and there have been incidents that have caused damage to our hardware. So we have that kind of a minor impact, but it's not like it's some major change to our day-to-day at present. Now, in the future, if they end up, there's talk of potentially more commercial stake in the space station that is beyond either of our expertise. I can't really speak to that. But that could impact who does spacewalks, I suppose, and and then if we're talking about the moon or Mars or something at some point, then SpaceX could have an impact on that. But right now, it's not a huge impact to us on a day-to-day.
Yeah. So
I would just add to that thinking outside of the scope of ISS, I think that's what these commercial companies are going to bring, is that it's going to free up NASA to be able to focus a little bit more on the true exploration of kind of the how far can we go and what new things can we accomplish. Whereas on the commercial side, we might see things like hotels in orbit, or the ability for civilians to be able to do a spacewalk, albeit for a ridiculous amount of money. But you consider the amount of knowledge that the Flight Operations Directorate has just in the decades of supporting ISS and even shuttle, and it's going to be interesting to see how the different commercial companies leverage that and how all the organizations work together to make sure that all these different venues are operating safely, but still extending the opportunity to more people.
Right. So I feel like we could talk about space stuff for another hour, but we should go to more pedestrian things at this point. You guys installed MediaWiki in 2011. What was the original goal of installing it?
So we had knowledge spread out in lots of different sources, and whether it was just on people's laptops or on shared drives or SharePoint or plain HTML websites, etc. And another thing we have is we have a certification guide that we use to initially get certified in the various things we get certified in, and then we also have to do proficiency, kind of based on that certification guide on a periodic basis. And one of the most common comments about that certification guide was, it'd say, go study this thing or go learn this thing or take this class. And this was a paper, printed out guide, several tens of pages long, and you'd go and read it and try to find the information that it was covering, and the information location had changed. Any links that had been written down there were broken, or
right.
So we had a big issue of just this knowledge distributed out over lots of different platforms, and it was constantly getting updated and broken. So in late 2011, Daren and I had been discussing lots of different ways we might be able to handle that, and it was coming up on kind of the holidays, and Daren, I think, was going to be working. He was one of the people that was working in mission control potentially over the holidays, and so he had to stick around. And he said, "Hey, can you set up MediaWiki on a server that I had access to that we could kind of test things on?" And so I set it up, and he kind of started running with it for the first few months, and used it a lot for, I think, proficiency stuff, and I'll let Daren talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it was, I mean, just kind of real quickly going back to the motivation, when I had to go through all that initial certification and I struggled to find the information I wanted, I thought one day just driving to work, like, hey, this is where, Google and Wikipedia were already a few years into being the thing, like if you need to know something, you go to Wikipedia or to Google and search for it rather than having a hierarchical structure, the more traditional system of knowledge management, you just search for things.
Right.
And I thought, man, why don't we just have this at work? And so, yeah, once we finally had it up and running, thanks to James, I just started pouring stuff in um, as a secondary action to my proficiency training. So back then, every 2 years, we had to go through a large list of rules and guidelines and history, just things to remind us how to do our job at a quality level. And so instead of just reading it, I also moved that content from documents that were sitting on some shared drive hidden somewhere. I moved that content into the wiki and started building some of the structure to organize it using templates and categories.
Do either of you remember some moment when you realized that the wiki could become more than just another text resource? Or is that sort of in the back of your minds from the beginning that the wiki could become the go-to place for a lot of different things, including structured data?
I think we realized pretty quickly that it would at least be a way to generally organize. Um, um, even now, we try. While we do have a lot of text in our wikis, we try to link out to more definitive sources. So we have certain things that we have drawings databases for drawings of different hardware, and we have various different things like that we try to link out to. And so even now we're doing that and not using MediaWiki predominantly for those things.
I think one of the other, it's really hard to remember back 6.5 years ago what we were really thinking, but um, some of the other problems with like a Word file, for example, it has track changes, but if it's trying to track changes for something that's only ever released with a new revision every year, then it's really hard to look at all of those changes that have been accumulated. And then typically on some of our more important documents, there'd be a cover sheet within that same document that would say, try to summarize the changes. But usually humans are really lazy at that part and do a terrible job at describing what all changed from Rev B to Rev C.
Sure.
And so I want to think that at least at the very beginning, we saw the potential in how every wiki page, every time you save it, whether it's just a typo or you're changing 5 paragraphs, not only can you see a difference very easily, but you can also allow the user to write a summary of that change. And it just seemed to give a little bit more information, a little bit more background for when things change. And you could also immediately know what's the current version instead of, if you look in the directory and there's 3 different versions of the document, but you can't quite tell which one you need to work off of.
Sure.
Whereas in the wiki, it's very clear.
Yeah. Briefly, could you describe the state of things in 2018? How many wikis are there now at NASA? How many people reading them? How many people editing them, etc.?
Yeah, so editors across all wikis, if I recall correctly, is somewhere in the order of 350. And that's across, in total, just shy of 20 wikis, I believe.
Wow.
Some of those are pretty minorly used, if used at all. The bulk of the traffic is on, I would say, six or 7 wikis. And then maybe there's a couple more that are a little bit smaller. There are, I think, 4 of them that have ballpark 50 active editors per month. Yeah, that 350 before 350 was monthly active.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, there's I think 4 that are probably 50 active editors per month, and viewership across is something on the order of 1,000, 1,500 a month. I actually don't have that. Haven't looked at that in a while, but
yeah, okay. How have things changed between 2011 when you started and 2018 in terms of organizational awareness of MediaWiki? If you go to suggest MediaWiki to some new set of users at NASA, is that easier than it used to be?
I think the one thing that makes it easier is that we have a tangible product that we can showcase the strengths and the unique things that our wiki platform can do that no other option can handle. So whereas when we first had to explain to our own EVA group of roughly 50 people, there was, we could show them Wikipedia, but it's kind of like, well, how does that work in an enterprise environment where
Right.
There's not going to be vandalism. We know exactly who made an edit to every page. There's no anonymous edits, so we can, it's not going to be an issue. And whereas now we have really good examples, and that's within the organization. It's free advertising to explain to people why they should change to the wiki way.
Right, but you're not getting a sense that people, the people you haven't talked to before, have now heard about MediaWiki or wiki stuff and are sort of asking for it on their own.
Some people are, and it's kind of interesting. There's some people that tend to just be not interested in the wiki, and so you have some people that are aware of it because they may have to use it for some aspect of their job, but they really don't want to, and they may speak negatively of it. But we get a lot of people that want new wikis, and we can talk a little bit more about where we're going with wikis in a minute. But we've got a lot of people that are asking for new wikis, and we're kind of saying, well, we've got all these other ones that are in that your content would be in family, so why don't we use that instead? And that's kind of a new struggle. But we also,
Right.
One big difference between now and 2011, 2012 timeframe is if we were in a kind of our group's weekly meeting, and somebody mentioned wiki, then it was kind of like cringe and be fearful while everybody may come down on us for, we don't like this, or we're whatever nervous about using this new
Right.
platform or whatever. Whereas now, I mean, our group meetings, the word wiki is said dozens of times, and if anything, I'm more concerned about how aggressively people want to use it for every new thing, which it may not even always be the right choice. Like sometimes we have to push back and say, well, we already have this other thing that supports
Right.
that, or why don't we use Imagery Online for those? Imagery Online is one of our image databases. Why don't we use that, because that already exists and they have a contract for it, and it's one less thing we have to manage, that kind of thing. So it's definitely flipped a lot from that perspective.
Yeah, that's really cool. This seems like a good time to talk about SharePoint, which you mentioned briefly before. For those of you who don't know about it, Microsoft SharePoint is an extremely successful document and knowledge management system that has sort of been public enemy number one for anyone trying to increase usage of MediaWiki in companies and organizations pretty much since the beginning. As a consultant and developer myself, I've heard all sorts of reasons why companies are using SharePoint and not MediaWiki. But one thing I don't think I've ever heard is well, we've tried out both systems and people just prefer to use SharePoint. I know this is something you guys have dealt with a lot. I don't want to get too much into the technical details here. Actually, maybe it's worth having a separate episode of the podcast about that. But could you describe some of the challenges you've had in fighting against SharePoint at NASA and how successful that has been?
So yeah, we've had success within our specific group, our group of 50 people or so. I don't know how much we can speak to decreased usership of SharePoint outside of our small area. But we can speak to increased usership of Wiki, which you could probably infer that means decreased usership of other things. But specifically for our group, we used SharePoint fairly extensively in the 2011 timeframe, and we use it almost not at all now. There's still a few things that hold out for connecting to other groups that do use SharePoint still, and and just a few random documents that that for whatever reason we still maintain on SharePoint. And I think that the reason we've been able to encourage people to stop using SharePoint is because of just the ability to, really just the diff. You get an email that says this page changed, and people can go see exactly what changed, and that allows them to keep up to speed on what's changing. Versus when something changes in SharePoint, there's ways to turn on notifications, but it's not necessarily clear. It's something tucked in a Word document, and then you have to go and hopefully use track changes on that, but that may or may not show you what actually changed. So,
right, sure.
Something else that we have, I'm surprised it's taken this long to even come up, is Semantic MediaWiki as an extension to MediaWiki. And maybe we ought to rewind and talk about how long it took us before we found that extension. But
sure.
Just to address your point, I don't know if it has any kind of compatible or comparable feature. And so the more examples that we build to show how you can link data together, how you can make it where you can query meeting minutes, and then use that in a lesson plan somehow. The way that we've shown our group how all of the information being co-located and having semantic properties gives it so much more power. Eventually they start learning, oh yeah, well, we should move this over from SharePoint.
Right. One thing a lot of organizations share is the problem of data silos, which you've sort of alluded to, where data from different systems can't be viewed together if those systems are all even accessible from a computer in the first place. But one thing that I think makes NASA fairly rare is that there, from what I understand, access to the necessary data can literally be a matter of life and death in some cases. Could you talk about that?
Well, there have been some accidents that have resulted in loss of life, loss of astronauts. So there was the Columbia accident. Well, going way back, there was the Apollo 1 accident, which of course predates any kind of wiki talk. But then Columbia, the shuttle, and then Challenger, of course, as well. Kind of coming forward to the most recent incident that kind of hits home in EVA, we had US EVA 23, was it? Luca Parmitano was out with Chris Cassidy on a spacewalk, and his suit started putting water into the helmet. And we, at the time, we weren't really sure what was going on, and thankfully he was safely returned inside, and nothing happened, nothing seriously bad happened to him. And of course, there was a big investigation thereafter. But yeah, these accidents, several of them in the research that has been done afterwards, has some of the findings have been that the information being scattered and siloed off is a bad thing, and that there is this need to share the information to make sure that the right people that could have prevented those accidents are able to see the information ahead of time. And that's something that we're fighting day to day now, is trying to balance this need to know against the older, or balance the need to share against the older need to know mindset.
Right. In addition to maintaining and improving the wikis at NASA, you both have done a good amount of MediaWiki related development, especially James, I think. That includes a bunch of improvements to my own approved revs extension, and approved drives is also something that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But one particular extension that I think you, James, created that I do want to talk about is the Watch Analytics extension. Could you describe what it does?
So it does a few different things. The goal of it is to encourage people to use their watch list and keep track of certain pages. So the first thing it does is it actually removes the watch list page from the URL or from the links at the top right and replaces it with kind of a stylized version called pending reviews, because that's kind of more the way we think of it versus on Wikipedia. You may just be kind of keeping an eye on pages and you aren't necessarily required to make sure you see every change to every page on your watch list. Here within our environment, we're kind of trying to make it so if I'm watching a page, then I'm considered some level of authority on that page, and I want to make sure that every change that happens to it, I want to put my eyes on it,
right,
as best as possible. So instead of kind of thinking of it as a watch list, we think of it as these are a list of reviews that you should do, and if there's anything in this list, then they're pending. So we have pending reviews. And it kind of, one of the things that's kind of funny about the standard special page for watch list is the way it displays changes to a page. Like if you click on the diff button on a particular change, it doesn't show all changes since you last viewed the page. It just kind of shows that last one. So that was confusing to some people. So we kind of rolled it all up to show, here is a page that you haven't seen these, 30 changes over the last 6 weeks because you were doing other things or whatever. So it'll show you, here's the whole sum of all the changes, and you click one button and it shows them all those changes. Additionally, it sorts them by kind of priority to the wiki. So if a page is being watched and has been reviewed by 30 other people, that's kind of low priority from the perspective of the wiki as a whole. So it kind of puts that down at the bottom of a person's list, and instead puts at the top of their list pages that maybe just they or one other person has been watching. And there's also some built into that priority based on how much activity that page gets. So if it's a page that a lot of people are viewing, then also bump that up in priority, though we don't have any of that actually turned on at the moment. I don't remember how much that's effectively being used in the extension, because at the time that we made it, we just weren't getting enough views to really do anything significant with those numbers. So we didn't reuse that significantly. So that's kind of like the starting point of Watch Analytics. The next part of it is kind of, what do you do with that data as a whole? So if I am the type of person that always has weeks of pages pending in my list of reviews, and Daren is a person that always comes in and goes through all of them every morning and pretty much always has a zero watch list, then we want to be able to have that data as a whole and say, well, why are these people not getting through them? Are they watching too many pages? Are they are they somebody that's not even in our group? So that's fine. We don't mind that somebody that's just kind of lurking on the wiki from some other group and is just there for info only. Okay, we can kind of disregard those people. But if you have two people that we really want their input on the information, what is it that's causing them to not do those reviews? And can we encourage them to? Is there something we need to change about the software because it's not clear or whatever? So I think actually what spurred the creation of Watch Analytics initially was we realized how many people had reviews pending in just regular special watch list before we even had the pending reviews page. So we saw, oh wow, there's a large percentage of our group, and we created this visualization, which you can actually get to from special watch list, or sorry, from special watch analytics, that shows the kind of a graphical representation of all the pages on the wiki and all the users on the wiki, and it's a kind of a graph representation that shows links between those and shows the shows whether or not you're have reviewed the latest revision of the page and so on. And that visualization really allowed us to show our management, hey, people aren't reviewing this. We're reviewing their pages. We're saying that the wiki is better because we can review all these things, but people aren't doing it. So, and we kind of could lean on management to say, hey, can we try to make this better? Unfortunately, that visualization doesn't actually work on our wikis too well anymore because they've grown large enough that the extension needs to be updated for very large wikis. But
yeah, okay, right.
It works great for, if you're talking about, a few thousand pages or so, but once you're talking in the tens of thousands of pages and hundreds of editors, it doesn't work so well. So.
And I don't know if you want to get into it, but there's a couple more features that you didn't really mention that we kind of put in there, James put in there as sort of a placeholder for the future. But now that you can measure the data of a page over time and you can measure the interaction of those pages from its users, you have all these more analytics to show the trustworthiness of a page. You want to go over the scores?
So top right of every page, we have kind of scores for each page that are generated from the watch analytics data, and they show. One of them just shows the number of people who have reviewed the page. That's pretty straightforward. But overall page score is kind of more based on who the people are that are watching the page and how quick they are about doing reviews and kind of a individual's score from how they act overall and then how they add to the score of the page. So kind of you can look at the top right of the page and see, okay, well, we've got two numbers and they're red. And so that's kind of indicating this page may need a little bit more love versus we're talking about something that is getting a lot of attention from lots of people throughout the group. It's probably got a lot of reviewers and thus some good reviewers on there. And that'll be a big green number instead. So
yeah.
Is there something else you were thinking about there, Daren?
No, yeah, just making sure that we point out that we had a lot of other discussions about how can we make use of this information and really point out which areas of our wiki need attention and which areas you can really trust. And we're still trying to get our group to just plain review pages, let alone dive into the next level metrics that James just described.
So do you have a sense for how well it's worked in terms of boosting contributions and activity, either directly or indirectly?
I don't know that we can state any kind of data right here, but the addition of pending reviews definitely opened it up for a lot of people to understand what was changing, and it just improves visualization, personal visualization of what they have to look at and what they have to review. The just standard watch list just doesn't give you a good view of these are the things that have changed since you last saw them of pages you're watching.
Right, and I guess and this is how critical
kind of
it
more,
is for me to be looking at this change or that sort of thing. This is a change that a lot of other people are looking at versus this is a change that very few people are.
Yeah, but even just if you take away that sorting aspect, it's much more. I mean, it's designed for Wikipedia where there's thousands of edits over a very short period of time. So you may have lots of pages on your watch list, and they just kind of come streaming through your watch list. And whereas we're much more focused on over the course of a day, a typical user, maybe only 2 or 3 pages from their watch list get modified. So it should be manageable for them to go through them on a daily basis. But you don't want to see, well, I don't have a special watch list in front of me right now, so I'm kind of blanking a little bit on exactly what it looks like, but it makes it much more targeted for you. We expect you to review all of these and do them on a fairly regular basis. And so I think that helped a lot of people. In terms of the other thing we didn't really talk about was getting people to watch pages. So we had a lot of pages that are watched not at all, which is rare because most of the time if they're created, they're watched by at least that person. But watched just once is a much bigger issue. So in addition to listing the pages that you have to review on pending reviews, it also lists pages you may want to watch, and that's based on pages you're watching and the links on those pages, and it kind of determines that, hey, you're watching a lot of pages on simple tools like the ratchet wrench and pliers and whatever. So hey, maybe you also want to watch the EVA hammer page.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So and we did actually see a big spike in increased watchers when we added that feature, and specifically a big decrease in the once watched pages once we added that.
Right.
The effectiveness of that is hard to determine at this point because kind of took out a lot of the low hanging fruit initially, and then also just managing how it handles edge cases. So there's a lot of meeting minutes that are kept on our wikis, and they tend to link to lots of topics. So, but they also tend to link to other similar meeting minutes, even if they're not on the same topic. So one issue we've seen with that particular part of the extension is, okay, so I'll go and say, I'm interested in these 5 things, and then you start getting meeting minutes related to those things. And then maybe you watch some meeting minutes, and then before long, your watch suggestions end up getting filled with lots of meeting minutes. So that's one of the things that's a kind of something we wanted to improve for a long time is how it handles those watch suggestions and kind of making them more, making them cleaner.
Yeah.
And smarter.
Well, and we've even discussed the ethics of, should we force people to watch certain pages, like meeting minutes. We don't expect those to change. We don't expect those to change very often, but we would expect that everyone in our group at least reads them once. So, one could argue that everybody in the group should watch all meeting minutes pages and be notified when new meeting minutes come out. But then, some people get upset if you clog up their workflow with pages that they didn't voluntarily click to add to their watch list. So you got to kind of figure out how to come to an agreement on that.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, it certainly sounds ethical. Whether it's, whether it makes sense is a different story, but I don't see any harm with that.
Yeah, maybe ethical isn't the right word, but whether it's, one of the things we have to balance is encouraging people to do the right thing on the wiki, and right thing could be just using the right syntax, but at the same time not being too overbearing.
Right.
We haven't heard it in a while, but we used to be called Wiki Police fairly regularly, and we actually learned that's not that term crosses organizational bounds. The other people have been called the same thing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Wiki Cops or something like that. I don't remember what organizations, but some EMW cons I remember having the same discussion, that you see somebody do something slightly wrong and you're like, well, I should probably tell them about it, and either you just fix it on wiki or you walk down to their office and explain it. And
Right,
give
after
it
a few
enough time.
visits like that. Yeah.
Yeah, even if it's all, nobody's mad and it's all best intentions, people start calling you wiki police. Wiki police. So you kind of have to balance out, um, do I want to forcibly add these these pages to somebody's watch list? Is that the best thing for the wiki as a whole, or do we want to not do that so that we don't anger, users who are working hard to do good things? We want to keep them happy too.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it sounds like a very interesting extension, Watch Analytics. I haven't tried it myself yet, but I certainly hope to try it, and I hope a lot of people listening to this podcast consider trying it out also. It seems like it solves a few different problems related to, ensuring proper editing and vetting and maintenance of the content. This ties into something that you guys have talked before about at MediaWiki related conferences, which is motivating people to edit and maintain wiki content. You guys have a lot of experience with this sort of thing, having launched so many wikis. Do you have any advice on what works as far as motivating people to contribute?
So, there's just a lot of different personalities out there that you kind of have to appeal to. But probably one of the most initial, like the most effective ways to get the most people started is just kind of introducing it to their workflow. So when we first started the wiki, I said how I started creating pages based on the proficiency training. And as part of that, we ended up with a page for every tool, a page for every piece of hardware that we might change out during the spacewalk. And that over the course of the first year is when we built up our critical mass to where, now we had a better tool catalog in the wiki than there was anywhere else. It just had more information because it just organically grew. But then with all that information in there, already kind of bootstrapped for everybody else, now when you go to a meeting and you start talking about the EVA ratchet wrench, you can take notes in the using meeting minutes in the wiki, and then you can tag the ratchet wrench as a related article, and so then it just ties everything together. And so it's kind of a minimum buy-in for someone. They're already going to have to take notes on this meeting, but then if they just tag the various articles that are related, it automatically appends those meeting minutes to the pages for each of those pieces of hardware, and it gives their notes that they would have already taken just in an email or something, but it gives it a lot more functionality, a lot more use later on from all the other people in the group. And so I guess, out of that, that you'll get more people that see the value in taking the time to enter it into the wiki. That's probably one of the most broad features or aspects that you have to address is how is this worth my time? Why should I take the extra effort to put it in the wiki? And when they start seeing other people using their meeting minutes or other people using that little tidbit of information they added to the ratchet wrench page, then they say, oh, you know what, it was worth my time because so and so used it, and I'm happy that I was able to help them.
So you're sort of in the position of priming the pump, I guess. You have to put an effort at the beginning to populate the wiki, and then eventually people will start doing it on their own.
Yeah. So I think getting a critical mass in there is something we've definitely encouraged a lot of newer wikis to start with. You get some amount of information in there, and then when a new user comes along, it becomes just kind of an economical decision as to whether or not to contribute to the wiki. So, for example, we would take, if I had to go find some piece of information prior to the wiki, it might take 10 minutes of digging around in various different sources to go find that piece of information, versus once the wiki existed for a fairly small subset of our information initially, it was like open wiki, type 7 characters, hit enter, and you're on the page that you need to be at. So it's like you went from 10 minutes to 10 seconds to find that information. So
Right.
that's a no-brainer for people to consume the information. It's like, well, I can go spend 10 seconds, even if it's not there, that's 10 seconds wasted, and then I'll go spend 10 minutes to go find it somewhere else if it wasn't there. In terms of contribution, though, when they go to the wiki and they've been successful finding the information a few times, but then they look for something and it's not there, and then they go spend 10 minutes in digging it up somewhere else. It's kind of like, well, I probably will need this piece of information again at some point, and maybe the more altruistic people will say somebody else might need this piece of information at some point. So I can go spend 5 minutes figuring out how to edit this wiki, and put the information in there, and I'm still, as soon as one more person goes to find this, that 5 minutes is well worth it. And so you kind of just do that several thousand times, and then you have a giant wiki.
Yeah. When it comes to creating a new wiki, if you guys don't have time for it, do you try to find an evangelist, or I don't even know what the correct term would be, but someone to do that kind of initial ground laying work?
Usually when someone comes to us and asks for a new wiki, there's at least one or maybe two or three people that already kind of see the benefit, and they're willing. Like you say, they're sort of an evangelist. They're willing to do some of the grunt work to get it started. But in a lot of cases too, whether it's a Word document or a SharePoint site, if they have some document that kind of holds some basic information that they can use to bootstrap their wiki, that really helps too. And if you can pull that information out and run it right into the wiki, then they're not starting from scratch.
Yeah. Tied in with that, are there any sort of indicators early on about whether a new wiki is going to be successful?
I haven't thought about kind of predicting that before, but I would say that I think most of them have started with at least a couple of people working on them, not just a single person. There's a couple of them that have a single person that's been kind of doing most of the work, but I think generally speaking, it seems to work better when there's somebody else that you can bounce ideas off of, and somebody else that can consume that content. So I would encourage people to, if you have to go at it alone, absolutely give it a try. But I think it's been pretty successful when we've had two people kind of starting it out. Again, going back to critical mass, we definitely encourage people getting a critical mass to start. And if you're just a one person, then that's something you definitely want to think about what Daren was just saying about importing from some content. So there's things like Pandoc that you can use to convert Word documents to Wikitext and lots of other different formats. But and we for one wiki, they had a SharePoint wiki, and we kind of wrote a scraper to pull all the content off of that website and pull it into MediaWiki. And so that got, even though they only really had one person to start them out, they pulled in years of content. Had 1,000 wiki pages created basically instantly. So it was a pretty easy transition for them.
About BME, they had a Word document that was like hundreds of pages, or
yeah, there was one group that had a 800-page Word document that took several minutes to just open up, and I don't remember if they broke it up or what, but yeah, I mean, starting with some source. I mean, any enterprise use case like us has got something that they wish was better. I mean, otherwise, why would they be? They're not likely just starting totally from scratch. They have something that can probably be converted, and figuring out how to convert that and using a computer to do as much of the work as possible is definitely the way to go.
Right.
I think going back to your question of how can you predict success, I don't think it's too far off from how Wikipedia tries to predict whether a user is going to continue to contribute. I think one of the key things to remember with a wiki at work, especially, is that so if someone points out that something's wrong on the wiki page, hey, I need you to go fix this, you can say, well, no, anybody can fix it. It's not just the gatekeeper or whatever, the person that owns the document. It's anybody can go make the change now. And that opens it up to a much quicker turnaround to get the information corrected and up to date. So as long as you can measure how many of your people in your group are actually doing that, even if it's one little thing at a time, if you get enough people to actually feel compelled to go update a wiki page, then yeah, I think you'll see success.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Finally, the other big MediaWiki development project of yours that I wanted to talk about is Meza, spelled Meza. From what I understand, it's a project that's ongoing now to create command line commands for different Linux distributions to do standard MediaWiki actions like install a new wiki with extensions or upgrade an existing wiki. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Essentially, it started out as Daren and I were running wikis off of a Windows server for a long time, and we finally got access to a Linux-based server. We created a bunch of kind of manuals, just hey, to get Apache set up, do this, and set up PHP, do this, and that's kind of over time has morphed into a set of shell scripts, and then from there we kind of moved towards Ansible as doing a lot of the orchestration, and it's able to set up a separate database server and that sort of thing. Where we went with Ansible was to be able to set up multiple servers at once, that kind of thing. So,
initially we also had several wikis that would be on different versions. We had different wikis that were on different versions of MediaWiki, and each wiki had different versions of the extensions. And so if we went and updated one, then we had to go update and manually update all the other ones, and it was a configuration mess. So with Meza now it's all standardized, and it's one single wiki farm using the same sets of extensions and so forth.
Oh, so you're already using Meza internally?
Yeah. So initially Meza was just a set of almost internal manuals telling us how we set up our server, and it morphed from there into shell scripts, and we used those within the first 6 months of having that server, and maybe a year it took us to cut over from the Windows server to the Linux one. And so that was called Meza at the time, but it wouldn't really necessarily look the same as it does today. And that was 2015, 2016, I don't remember. It was a while ago. So Meza today is kind of, we try to automate just about everything. So, there's a Meza create wiki command, and it asks you a couple of questions and then creates the wiki for you, and pre-populates it with all the extensions, and pre-populates some amount of pages for those extensions and so forth. But really, we kind of, if we start doing the same thing for our server many times, so if it's like, oh, okay, we keep having these log files keep filling up, okay, well, let's write it such that doesn't happen. We'll automate it to clean up those log files and then build it into the Meza application to just do that, so somebody that down the road that uses Meza doesn't ever have to think about that.
What year was the conference in St. Louis? Was it about 2015?
2014, I think. Maybe 2000. You might be right. 2000 might be 2015. One of those 2 years.
Yeah, so I think that was another motivator for us too, was our backup and recovery response from some sort of failure. So James and I went to, I guess it was still SMWCon. That was when we first discussed in person about changing to EMWCon. But we were in St. Louis, and all of a sudden, James and my computers and phones started blowing up with messages, and the wiki server had gone down. People were freaking out, and so thankfully, James was able to address that remotely. But it kind of gave us more motivation to have a better. So with Meza, it's such a simple set of commands to set up a wiki on a new server versus, in that situation, we had to figure out, okay, we got to recover this, we got to reinstall this and wipe this out and set up here on the new server and just make sure everything's configured the same way. And oh, now we got this new version and it doesn't work well with this other thing. With the Meza project, because we test everything out every time there's a new release of MediaWiki or every time there's a new release of the extensions that we use, it's all vetted out and we can trust it. We know that it's going to work whenever we install it, or at least we have a high likelihood of trusting it. Whereas before it was just trying to manually keep up with everything, and then you throw in a hardware failure, and it's even that much more of a mess.
So I know the plan is to release Meza and make it available to everyone. What's the current status of that effort?
So Meza is available on GitHub at Enterprise MediaWiki is the name of the organization. That is not really a real organization. It was really just
we'll have a link to the
just a GitHub organization that Daren and I created as a place to commonly add to things, commonly work on projects. But anyway, Enterprise MediaWiki /Meza. So it's there already. I mean, it's where we use to store the code and all the issue tracking and everything. So I should say that Daren said it's I don't remember what words you said, all very simple, very easy. I think that's a relative term. We had some good discussions at EMWCon this year about things that were unclear about it and things that could be improved. If you're comfortable using Vagrant, then I would say setting up Meza locally is very easy. It's pretty straightforward. If you have no idea what Vagrant is, then setting it up locally is not so easy. Not that it requires Vagrant, you can install it on any server, but just giving an idea of what simple means. I think there's a lot of room for improvement to make it so that I can explain to my parents who've never, I don't think, ever done anything with any kind of servers before. Explaining to them like, hey mom, this is what you do to set up Meza. Like that would be that's kind of the stretch goal of being able to just give it to anybody and say, here, install this.
I just meant in comparison. So like once we figured out how to get VE working, Visual Editor, once we got Visual Editor working and we could replicate it, it's like, okay, let's script this so that we don't screw it up every time. Or once we got Elasticsearch going, okay, let's make sure we get this added in so that we're not constantly trying to figure out how to configure it properly.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize before that Meza actually is fully public. I see now it even has a page on MediaWiki.org. So we'll have a link to that and to the GitHub project and other stuff for Meza, so people can try it out for themselves. I think that's all my questions. Thank you very much. Let's try it again. Thank you very much to both of you, Daren and James. It was great to talk to both of you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you.
This has been Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guests, Daren Welsh and James Montalvo. Did I mention they're from NASA? Anyway, see you next time.